Welcome back, Cubs. Direwolf here, and today we're going to be responding to Riley Dennis. Again. I wish I wasn't, but Riley keeps saying horribly racist things that, shockingly, many people actually agree with. I wouldn't say that a majority of people agree with Riley Dennis's views on reverse racism, but enough do that it's worth addressing. Here's what Riley had to say about the idea of reverse racism and hashtag not all white people.
Look, before we get into this video, I just want to note that obviously I'm really white.
Most people would say it's silly to have to point out the color of your skin, but not I. For all we know, she could be a Rachel Dolezal, a transracial black woman in a white man's body.
I just don't want it to come across as like, I'm one of the good ones, because I'm still learning how to combat racism and white supremacy myself.
Because the core foundation of your argument is, there is no good white person. They are all guilty by virtue of their existence of racism, including yourself.
Anyway, the point of this video is that not all white people bullshit.
If I said that saying not all black people was bullshit, you'd call me a racist. But when you say not all white people is bullshit, it's somehow a virtue. You simply need to reverse the generalization that you're making to see how racist of a statement you are making.
If you don't know what I mean, let me give you an example. Let's say a person of color experiences some kind of racism from a white person. In frustration, they say, white people are horrible. At this point, you can expect some kind of white person to pop up out of the bushes and scream, not all white people, you shouldn't generalize us like that. That's reverse racism.
Wrong, Riley. It's just called racism because it is generalizing and judging an entire group of people based on the color of their skin. It is just as toxic and harmful no matter who it comes from.
These white people, the ones who constantly scream, not all white people, and reverse racism, argue that making a generalization about white people is just as bad as making a generalization about people of color.
It is just as bad. In fact, it is the exact same thing. But it's not just generalizations that they are responding to. They're responding to claims that all white people are racist and supportive of white supremacy, and that all white people are guilty of the crimes that only some have committed, and the things that they have earned, they did not earn on their own merits, and thus do not deserve. And the idea that it is okay to discriminate against white people and deny them jobs and opportunities just because they are white. They're responding to these harmful claims and saying, I'm not this evil person you've made me out to be.
They think that saying white people are horrible is just as bad as saying black people are horrible.
They are only not the same thing if you believe only one of them is not true. The blind hatred of a group based on their skin color has led to violence and pain for both blacks and whites.
On like a total surface level, you might think, yeah, that makes sense. Those statements are both generalizations about a race.
And at a deeper level, you can realize that the hatred of that one white man who went into a black church and killed a bunch of black people because he hated people based on the color of their skin is the same kind of hatred that leads people from Black Lives Matter to blindly target innocent white people to want to harm them and kill them just because they are white. For you to suggest that bigotry towards white people is somehow more acceptable than bigotry towards black people, then you are being racist.
But if you look just a little bit harder at the cultural, social, political, and historical context,
you'll realize that your acceptance of and justification for racism towards white people will normalize it and encourage the growth of the cancer of racism in our society. You will be teaching black people that it is okay to hate white people and be creating anger among whites who feel they're unjustly under assault. Your idea that racism is not equally bad for both blacks and whites has already led to violence in the past and will lead to more violence in the future.
It's pretty easy to see that they are not equivalent statements.
They are equivalent statements. Hate is hate, and they both lead to harm. For you to be morally consistent, you must be opposed to racial hatred no matter who it comes from.
I mean, black people in the US were slaves, and then they were considered 3/5 of a person, and then they lived under Jim Crow segregation laws, and even today they still experience systemic racism on a daily basis.
Actually, black people have a systemic advantage when it comes to college applications and some job hiring. A recent study showed that law enforcement, as a system in the United States, was more hesitant to shoot a black person than a white person in the same situation. The mainstream media, as a system, quickly demonizes good cops like Darren Wilson, and jumps to blindly defend criminal thugs like Michael Brown, based purely on their skin color and their narrative. The mainstream media being the same system that was for the term Black Lives Matter, that was attached to a group that was guilty of multiple acts of horrendous race-based violence, while at the same time claiming that statements like, it's okay to be white, and all lives matter are racist, even though neither statement is connected to a group that has attacked people in the street and burned down buildings. And our government system that has black people in every level of government, from the presidency down to governorship. And our capitalist system that allows black people to achieve success as far up as the Fortune 500 CEOs all the way down based on their own merits. And lastly, in our system of laws, where every black person is afforded the same privileges and rights as any white person. And there is no American law you can point to that benefits a white person over a black person. That still exists today.
The prejudice and discrimination that was built into our institutions and systems didn't go away overnight with the Civil Rights Act of 1965.
Some individuals are racist, but not all individuals should be punished for the racism of some. We are not a collective. We are all individuals.
Racism and, by extension, white supremacy both still have a deep hold on this country.
I would argue that people like you are an example of how anti-white racism actually has a hold on our country. And your hatred is no better than the hatred from a white supremacist.
To be a person of color in the US today means to live under a system that was not only not built for you, but was built to harm you.
It legitimately saddens me that young black people are being taught this false expectation by regressive teachers and professors, whom are warping and tainting the lens with which they view the world. They've taught the last few generations to see evil and hatred everywhere. So in turn, they hate, and they're willing to do evil things. You've taught them that it is okay to hate an entire group of people based on the color of their skin because they first feel that they were hated for the color of their skin. Not all monsters occur naturally. Some are created.
If you don't believe that people of color are marginalized and oppressed in a way that white people are not, you're just being willfully ignorant at this point.
Oh really? Ben Carson disagrees with you. Black people in America are not held down by white supremacy or any kind of system, but the culture in some black communities does hinder progress and success. But blaming white people and white supremacy will not fix those problems.
Black people in the US have been oppressed and continue to be oppressed in ways that white people will never fully be able to understand.
Some black individuals, just like some white individuals, are the victims of racism, and both crimes should be held in the same regard. Black people as a whole are not oppressed, systemically or otherwise. It is absolutely true that some black families are starting from an economic disadvantage because of policies and laws that no longer exist, as well as the beliefs and behaviors of racist individuals in the past and present. However, those individuals are the extreme minority, and until recently they've been on the decline. However, your justification of the hatred of white people will only halt or reverse that. And the fact is that there is just as many, if not more, white people in the same economic position, dealing with the same disadvantages that come with poverty, higher levels of crime, and poor education. In America, blacks and whites both benefit from high levels of upward mobility, and with hard work and merit can pull themselves out of poverty.
So when you say something in 2017, knowing everything that has happened up until now, your words live in the context of this time period, in this culture, in this political context.
No matter what some white people may have done badly to some black people in the past, it doesn't make the hate of white people any less bad, or the hatred of black people any worse. In the context of individualism and individual responsibility, where people are responsible for their own words and actions, and not those words and actions of other people in the past, racial hatred and bigotry is equal, no matter what the skin color of the perpetrator.
So let's say you're a white person, and you say, black people are horrible. In a greater context, you are a member of a group that oppressed black people for a long time and continues to do so today.
This person is only guilty of their own hatred, and no other white person, I repeat, no one else is guilty of the bigotry this person espoused.
I can already hear the white people chiming in saying that they weren't alive during slavery, so they shouldn't be responsible for it. And like, sure, you're not directly responsible for slavery, but you continue to benefit from the oppression of black people, which has had its roots in slavery.
Slavery and oppression in American history may have not started black people and white people on even footing, but just because some white people in the past committed crimes, it doesn't mean that the white people today that have done nothing wrong need to pay for those crimes. Life isn't fair. Many people start with disadvantages that others don't have. People who are shorter have a disadvantage to those who are taller. Rich whites have an advantage over poor whites. But you shouldn't take from those who are tall to give to those who are short, and you shouldn't take from those who have earned money to give to those who have not. There are very many highly educated and very wealthy black men who have shown that for a long time they've been able to overcome these disadvantages. And yes, those disadvantages may not be fair. However, they are not the fault of someone who's white just because of the color of their skin.
So I'm not saying that white people need to hate themselves or have guilt over this. I just think we need to recognize our role as people who have benefited from racism and who are a part of a group that has oppressed and continues to oppress black people.
Actually, what you are literally saying is because some people in the past who share our same skin color did bad things, that we should feel that it is not as bad for people to be racist towards us when we've done nothing. And you're saying, if we do the same thing to them that they are doing to us, that we are worse than them. Which sounds like not only guilt, but self-hatred.
And then we need to work to fight against that. And part of what that means is that when you, as a white person, say, black people are horrible, your words are just perpetuating the oppression of black people that white people have been doing for a long time.
If you want to truly fight racism, you should fight racism in all its forms, not treat some as worse than others.
You're continuing that racist cycle. You're adding fuel to the fire. On the other hand, if a black person says white people are horrible, it doesn't have that weight behind it. The power dynamics are completely different. It doesn't perpetuate systemic racism.
Systemic racism is born from the normalizing and justification of racist beliefs, just like you are doing now. When a white person is denied a job because of their skin color, they are harmed and disadvantaged the same way as when a black person is denied a job based on their skin color. When a white or black person are assaulted because of racial hatred, the harm is the same. The normalizing and justification of racial hatred leads to action. You should look at the past and say racism led to terrible things, so we shouldn't justify or allow racism from anyone. But if you say, no, it wasn't racism that was the problem, it was the white people that were doing the racism that were the problem, then history is doomed to repeat itself.
Doesn't result in the institutional oppression of white people.
But it easily could in the future, just like it did in Africa.
It's just an expression of anger against an oppressor group. That's all there is to it.
Riley, that's horribly racist. Individual white people are not part of a group of oppressors. You're demonizing them purely on the color of their skin. They have no substantive connection to the racist of the past. And you're including all the white people who have given their time and money to help the poor, including black people. You're judging individuals not by their actions, but by their skin color. That makes you a racist.
The two statements don't carry the same weight or historical context. For centuries, white people insulting black people has led to their enslavement, disenfranchisement, and oppression. Meanwhile, black people insulting white people hasn't had anywhere near the same impact on white people.
But justifying and normalizing that racism could lead us down the same path. That hatred from either side is what leads to dehumanization and will give birth to violence.
Best analogy I can think of to demonstrate this kind of power dynamic in a really simple way is this. Imagine there's a queen and a peasant. Obviously, the queen has a lot of power and the peasant does not have a lot of power. Now, the peasant can point at the queen and say, throw her in jail, and it won't have any effect. The guards aren't going to listen to a peasant.
And a white person can point to a black person and tell the cops, throw him in jail, and if he's committed no crime, the police will not do that. Because white people, by virtue of their skin color, do not have institutional or cultural power over black people.
But if the queen points to the peasant and says, throw her in jail, then the guards will listen, and the peasant will end up in jail. Both parties said the same phrase directed towards the other one, but one of those phrases had a lot more power because of the context.
However, we do not live in a monarchy in our current system of laws, and in our culture, your analogy makes no sense and has no cultural relevance. But a law-abiding black person can point to a white person who is committing a crime and tell the police, arrest him, he's committing a crime, and they will do it. And it's very possible one of the cops arresting that criminal white person might be black. And the judge and jury will very likely have some members of the public who are black. And when that criminal white person goes to jail, there's a very good chance that at least one of his jailers will also be black.
Did not. If you ignore the context of a situation, you miss a huge chunk of the story. If I told you that story, but I just said there were two people who each shouted at the other one, throw her in jail, without any context, you'd probably be confused as to why only one of them ended up in jail. That's because you'd be ignoring the power that each person had or didn't have and the general context behind it all.
But again, the context of your story does not relate at all to our culture or our country, and it does not justify your bigotry.
That's why reverse racism isn't a thing, because systemic racism hurts and oppresses people of color, not white people. While people can certainly be rude or prejudiced towards white people, that still doesn't mean that white people face systemic oppression in anywhere near the same way that people of color do.
Again, Riley, on an individual basis, the effects and harm caused by racial hatred is the same no matter the skin color of the perpetrator, and it is amplified and becomes systemic when it is normalized.
Okay, so context matters when it comes to generalizations, but also when white people say not all white people, they're usually taking a complaint about racism and making it about themselves. The only time I've heard generalizations from people of color about white people has been after a person of color has experienced some kind of racism. So, for example, let's say a person of color on Twitter tweets something about systemic racism. In response, they get a bunch of ignorant white people replying and calling them racial slurs and saying that racism doesn't exist and all of that.
For some reason, I doubt that someone is both calling someone a racial slur and also in the same breath saying that racism does not exist. But let's say hypothetically this happened. Just because these people were jerks, it doesn't then make it okay to say that I, as a white person, am also guilty of the same things that they did. It doesn't make it okay for you to judge and hate all white people just because some white people were rude to you. Just like it's not okay for for me to judge or hate all black people just because a black person is rude to me, because they are individuals.
In response, they say something to the effect of, I am so tired of white people. They're horrible. And that's when the not all white people crowd comes in. Some white person pops up and says, not all white people are like that. I'm one of the good ones. In this way, all that saying not all white people does is absolve that white person of any guilt and make the situation about them.
Or they're telling that black person, why are you hating me? I've done nothing wrong to you. It's normal human reaction to defend yourself when someone says you're a horrible person and you've done nothing wrong. Just like when a white supremacist says that all black people are criminals, black people say, hey, I'm not a criminal. It's really normal for people to defend themselves when they're accused of doing something they haven't done.
Why do you have a need to insert yourself there and
They didn't insert themselves. The racist who said that all white people are terrible inserted all white people into the conversation.
defend yourself? It doesn't make the situation any better. It doesn't get rid of the racist nonsense that person has had to endure, and it doesn't challenge it either. It's just
But it does challenge the fact that they responded to being the victim of racism by being racist themselves.
I understand that you want to defend yourself and you feel like when someone makes a comment about white people that it affects you. But the truth of the matter is that you're going to be just fine. Generalizations about white people are not going to hurt you. They're not going to contribute to unfair housing discrimination against you or lead to a racial hiring bias against you because you're white.
There's already racial hiring biases against white people. It's called affirmative action. Have you heard of it? Some companies already have diversity quotas for hiring, and some universities have even regressed to creating segregated spaces for different racial groups. And the nonsense of cultural appropriation is racism that almost exclusively targets white people, telling them how they can or cannot talk, how they can or cannot act, and what they can or cannot wear. White people are not protected from the effects of racism because of their skin color. It's because of things like this and people like you that justify racism against white people that the majority of white people in America view white Americans as being victims of racism. Riley Dennis, I, unlike you, am against racism in all of its forms. And I believe that every individual that is guilty of racism is equally wrong. I'm opposed to judging an entire group of people with the same skin color because of the actions of a few, and I reject the idea that you can fix the inequalities from the past by creating inequalities in the present. Not the equality of results, but the equality of opportunity, and equality under the law. Riley, what you believe and what you are teaching, if widespread, will lead to pain and suffering, because your justification of bigotry will lead to violence. Direwolf out.
I hope you enjoyed the video, Cubs. This video was brought to you by Virtual Shield, because YouTube is literally demonetizing all of my content, no matter how innocent it is. But also because I do use Virtual Shield to protect my IP and my anonymity. If that's important to you as well, and you currently don't have an IP masking service, please check out the link below. Hello Cubs, thank you for watching. If you liked the video, please hit that like button, and if this is your first time and you want to see more content from me, please subscribe. And if you want YouTube to ignore your request for notifications from my channel, hit that bell button. It won't do anything, but at least you'll feel like you accomplished something. And if you want to support my channel financially, please check out my Patreon. Even $1 a month goes a long way. Monthly donations through Patreon, buying stuff from my merchandise store, or simply by watching and liking my videos. No matter what way you choose to support my channel, I thank you very much for your support.